For the first time today, congressional leaders will be briefed on the drone strike that killed Iran's top general as questions mount about the justification for carrying out the killing. Joining us now is Senator Angus King. He's a member of the Intelligence and Armed Services Committee from the great state of Maine. Senator King, thanks so much for being with us this morning. We just learned moments ago that the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, will also brief the press at 10 a.m. this morning. This, of course, before the briefing later today for the Gang of Eight in Congress. What questions do you have for Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, who says the United States is safer as a result of the killing of General Soleimani, and also says that the attack was based on an imminent threat without producing the evidence? So what questions do you have this morning?
Well, I think there are two or three issues to start with. One was, should there have been consultation with Congress? And as you point out, was it an imminent threat? What does the intelligence say? I have not yet seen that intelligence. I'm having a briefing this afternoon at the Intelligence Committee. Hopefully we'll be able to dig into that. But John, I really think the more important question is not whether it was legal or consultation or all of that, whether it was a smart move. As I see it, it was the opposite, that they've strengthened the regime in Iran. 2 weeks ago, there were protests against the regime. Now there are protests against us, massive protests. They've given the regime an outside target to divert from their sort of internal problems of the economy. We've given ISIS a new foothold in Iraq, as we've already done in Syria. We've alienated our European allies. Certainly people, Americans in the Middle East, cannot feel safer today than they did this time last week. The list goes on and on. We just heard this morning that Russia is graciously offering to step in to Iraq, and we're talking about the possibility of the Iraqis expelling us. Ironically, one of Soleimani's principal goals was to get us out of Iraq, and this killing may end up resulting in the goal that he wanted to achieve. So I think the real question, John, is what was the strategy here? What are the next steps? We don't know what the response is going to be. I happen to think it might be a cyber response, which could be very, I don't know if it's catastrophic is the right word.
Let's talk about that, Senator, because yesterday the Department of Homeland Security's National Cyber Awareness System asked American organizations, especially those involved in supporting the country's critical infrastructure, to adopt a state of heightened awareness. How vulnerable do you think the U.S. is to an Iranian cyber attack?
We are very vulnerable. I'm glad to know that I was glad when they made that statement. I think we should be on high alert because I think cyber is one of Iran's possible actions. The Soviet Union and China or the Soviet Union, there it goes, Russia and China are the major actors in the cyber realm. But Iran has a significant capability which they've exercised in the past. So the answer is yes, there are vulnerabilities no matter how much we try to patch and defend. And I think this is one of the possible responses. But again, the overall picture is that you mentioned at the introduction, are we safer today because of this move? And I think the answer is clearly no. Now, you've got to acknowledge Soleimani was a terrible guy and with a lot of blood on his hands. And it's a good thing to get him off the world stage. The question is the timing and the place and why now, which has created all this cascade of problems.
I want to ask you another aspect of your job these days, which is as a potential juror in a Senate impeachment trial. We learned yesterday the former National Security Advisor John Bolton now says he would testify to the Senate if he received a subpoena. This is after declining the invitation to speak to the House during its impeachment process. You wrote an op-ed, a terrific op-ed, 1 month ago where you compared John Bolton to a Sherlock Holmes character, where you said basically he was the dog that didn't bark. You can tell the guilt of a matter by the dog that didn't bark. He's now willing to bark, he says. He's now willing to come and bark before the Senate. What does that tell you?
Well, I think he should. He should have come before the House, and I think the Senate should take his testimony. I can't imagine with a straight face how anybody around here could say, we don't want to hear the evidence. We don't want to hear the facts. And by the way, I have no idea what John Bolton is going to say. He could extricate the president from this entirely, or he could incriminate him. And I don't think anybody really knows. But the point is, we ought to have the evidence from John Bolton and Mick Mulvaney and Duffy and the others and the documents. I mean, the posture of some of my colleagues is hear no evil, see no evil and take no evidence. And I don't see how anybody can take that oath that we're going to have to take to do impartial justice in a trial. The Constitution uses the word trial,
Right.
without trying to get whatever evidence is available.
Marco Rubio says it should have come out before the House, and given that it didn't come out in the House process, the Senate's not the place to do it.
Well, that just doesn't make sense. I mean, we have to make our own judgment on what happened. What did the president do and why did he do it? And we ought to have all the information we can get into whether or not they got it in the House, whether they should have pursued the subpoenas through the courts, whatever that is. That doesn't alleviate our responsibility to make our judgment based upon whatever evidence is available.
One of the key Senate votes might come from your colleague from Maine, Senator Susan Collins, who my understanding so far has said, yeah, she's open to hearing witnesses, but she sides with Mitch McConnell that the Senate trial should start without an agreement to hear witnesses.
Well, it looks like that's what's going to happen. And the question is, are we just postponing a day of reckoning on witnesses to the middle of the trial? Again, remember, senators have to take a special oath. We're not legislating here. We're literally acting as jurors in a trial prescribed by the Constitution. The oath says, do impartial justice. And frankly, I don't see how some of my colleagues can do that, having already said they know how the case is going to come out. And that's a criticism of several people on both sides. But I think we're going to have to get to this vote. I'd be surprised if there's a unified Republican vote to say we don't want the evidence, because they're going to have to live with that vote. They're going to have to live with that vote. That's going to be, as Lincoln says, the fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. And that's exactly what we're facing here. This is history, and I think we need to get it right.
Senator Angus King from Maine, always great to have you on the show.
Thanks, John.
Please come back soon.